Shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hi, Rob Tawab la atam za achyakam yawam on Chagadol Charlotte, which is good evening. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam kaya hamalakotha shamayim kwara, repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call halayim la la banawa Yahweh bahasham Yahweh shai bahasham rocha hakodash wamashan la zakwanim nawa wamalakim sharor chagadol, which is our praise to our Father Yahweh, which means He exists. Bahasham, in the name Yahweh Shai, delivers and double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Zakwahalat, this is Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and we'll get verse 9. And it says, the thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. All right, because ultimately, just going into regeneration, the scriptures ultimately, deal with regeneration. All right, when it comes to kingdoms, you see, and then also, the people are essentially spirits are regenerated, and to reiterate, kingdoms are regenerated. All right, we've seen Egypt 1.0 going back to ancient Egypt, you see, but we have a Egypt 2.0 in America, Babylon the Great. America, Babylon the Great also takes on the spirit of Babylon. That's why it's known as Babylon the Great. All right, it also takes on the spirit of Assyria, all right, Nineveh, and so on and so forth. The scriptures essentially detail this place and similitudes, and then also it gives the generations of different kingdoms. All right, the regenerations of different kingdoms, as I just mentioned. So just wanted to go into a video just going into regeneration, because regeneration is biblical, which in the world, they call it a reincarnation, which is that's pretty much synonymous with regeneration. Re means again or back. All right. Carnation is flesh. You might hear carnation in like carnival. That goes into the word carn goes into some type of flesh. All right. Carnivore, meat. All right. That goes into flesh. So back in the flesh. Reincarnation is back in the flesh. Regeneration, is essentially the same thing. Back in the flesh, back in the your generation. All right. So reading it again, quite a lot. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 9. It says, the thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Now, also going into different innovations and inventions, essentially the things that have been of old, they here today. When we look at different inventions, i.e., the scuba diving tanks, they had those back in the ancient world. I believe it was the ancient Babylonians, they was using. Today they got, I believe they call it air rebreathers, and pretty much what it is, sometimes they might have one tank or two tanks, and it's got the little not the snorkel thing, but it's like a tube that leads from those pressurized air that's inside those tanks, and it leads to like a diver's mouth. All right, but in the ancient world they would have used like something like a bladder or a organ of an animal, and it pretty much held air in it, and they were able to dive down in deep sea. They also had different types of goggles as well, so the different innovations and stuff like that, they've been here since the beginning. Like when you see what's dude's name, Elon Musk, he came out with the Cybertruck, so called, or so to speak. He didn't really come out with the blueprint for the Cybertruck. That was, I believe they had that a couple 100 years ago. He pretty much just brought it back up. So pretty much just providing some examples as to how different ideas and stuff has been regenerated. But more specifically, just going into spirits being regenerated. So let's get Malachi chapter 4, and we'll get verse 5. And it says, behold, I will send you Elijah, Alayah the prophet, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. And now Elijah, he was also John the Baptist. All right, and then also in one of his generations, in a most recent generation, he was Elder Abba Bivens, all right, which he came on the scene in the late 1960s, like 1969, the year 1969, around the year of 1969, so that was one of his generations, as Elder Abba Bivens. All right, so let's also get this. This is Daniel chapter 12, and we'll get verse 13, and it says, It says, "But go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of days." All right, in the end of days, let's get this in NLT. NLT, it says, let me see. So pretty much, I'll read in the KJV again. It doesn't really give much in the other versions. But this is Daniel chapter 12 and verse 13. And it says, "But go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of days." So um, Daniel, he's here in these last days, essentially going to the last days. But it says stand in thy lot. All right, and when it says stand, all right, it says Imad, and it says, I'm gonna skip down to the point, but it says to rise. It says be erect, be upright, to arise, appear, come on the scene. All right, so to come on the scene, pretty much in regeneration, because Daniel, all right, is here in these end times, and he's one of the elect. All right, so let me see. I'm gonna also get this. So give me a second. Man, look up his precept real fast. This is Job Ayawab chapter 19. All right, and we'll get verse 25. And it says, I'll start at verse 23. It says, "Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book, that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body." All right, because let's go back. Let's get a quick precept real fast. This is let's get Quahalat, Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 7. And it says, "Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto the Most High who gave it." So the order of things, when one passes, the bodies, they go unto the dust, to the earth. All right, and the spirit goes back up to the Lord. With the animals, their spirit just goes into another animal. So going back to that Job Ayawab chapter 19, and we'll get verse 23 again, or verse 24. And it says that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see the Most High. So ultimately, the worms are ultimately going into that decomposition phase, where those bodies essentially are destroyed and decomposed, within the earth. All right, and again, the spirit goes up to the Most High. You see, but I'm gonna keep going. It says, "And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see the Most High, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me." So ultimately going into regeneration, you see, because the Most High Yahweh, is dispatching his son Yahweh Shai, and he's ultimately the Redeemer. All right, that's why it goes into the curses. No man shall buy thee, or no man shall redeem thee. Roughly paraphrasing, because the Lord Yahweh Shai, that's what he's coming to do. Yahweh Shai, he delivers. All right, he's coming to deliver, and that word for deliver also goes into to redeem. So nevertheless, continuing on, let's get a couple more examples. Let's get First Corinthians chapter 14. We'll get verse 32. All right, man. It says, "And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets." All right, we got Daniel chapter 12 and verse 13. All right, ultimately going into how, Daniel and, the rest of the prophets too, they standing in their lot, so it wouldn't be to where, somebody is a two-third. All right, they wouldn't be a prophet, all right, in one of their last generations. All right, if somebody was two-third, they'll be two-third, just like if somebody was a prophet, they're going to be a prophet in this time. You come back doing the same thing. That's why it says, and the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets, so everybody comes back in there a lot. All right, so a few more. We'll get Matthew Mathathia chapter 11, and we'll get verse 11. And it says, "Verily I say unto you, among them that are born of woman, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And from the days of John the Baptist until now the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets in the law prophesied until John, and if ye will receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come." All right, and Elias is just the great size way of saying Alayah, which is Elijah. All right, because again, John the Baptist and one of his generations, he was Elijah. All right, and also he came as high priest Abba Bivens. All right, so continuing on, we'll get let's get this scripture right here. This is Matthew chapter 19. We'll get verse 28. All right, it's going into regeneration. All right, and it says, Then answered Peter and said unto him, Behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? And Yahushua said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that ye which followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Yasharallah. So in the regeneration, because the Lord Yahushua, he had followers in the ancient world. All right. In this time, all right, those same, followers are essentially going to follow the Lord Yahushua, just as they did in the ancient world. You see, in those individuals, being the elect, are ultimately going to inherit, the kingdom. All right. And it's going to come with the benefits as listed in this right here. All right, I'm continuing on. It says Matthew 19 and verse 28. It says, and Yahushua said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, because ultimately going into, joint heirs, all right, as pursuant to in Romans. But it says, Yea also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel, and everyone that hath forsaken houses and brethren or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive an hundredfold, and shall inherit everlasting life. You see, so ultimately, going into the blessings of the kingdom, because those that, on this side, all right, and essentially, going back to the literal example, because everybody was essentially required, to essentially put aside, their lives for something greater, all right, for to essentially sacrifice, their lives to live after the Lord, which is a far greater ROI, all right, which a ROI is a return on investment, all right, but ultimately going back to the point that, all right, that happened in the ancient world, all right, and in the same way as that happened in the ancient world, those same spirits are coming back, all right, and they're following the Lord, all right, present, all right, in the regeneration, all right. So let's get a couple more. We'll get John chapter 9, all right, and we'll get verse 1. And it says, And Yahushua passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Yahushua answered, Yahushua answered, Neither had this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of the Most High should be made manifest in him. Because ultimately, if he would have sinned, or excuse me, starting back from verse 1, it says, And as Yahushua passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. It says, and which, if he was blind from his birth, that could have been a judgment that essentially played out from one of his previous generations. Verse 2, And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents? So they pretty much was asking, did he, sin in one of his generations? Because he couldn't have sinned he was blind from birth, so he couldn't have did anything wrong being born. So it says, who did sin, this man or his parents? Because then, essentially, if it was his parents, that would essentially be, like judgment by default, upon, the child. But it says that he was born blind. Yahweh Shai answered, neither had this man nor his parents, but that the works of the Most High should be made manifest in him. Because ultimately it was common knowledge, all right, in the ancient world that, the Lord dealt in regeneration, and we've got countless amounts of examples as to, regeneration in the scriptures. All right, so I'm going to get one more and that'll be it. But this is our Revelation chapter 1. And we'll get verse 7. And it says, behold, he cometh with clouds. All right, the Lord Yahweh Shai, when he returns, he's coming with clouds. All right, and those clouds are essentially chariots. All right, and at times, the chariots cloak themselves as clouds. It says, behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him. Because, when he comes back, he can come on that Father's ship. It's been different reports, as to, how big the chariots is. And then also in 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter, it says, Ezra said he would have seen the place wherein the hill was graven on a mountain, but he couldn't because it was so vast, it was so big. Roughly paraphrasing, so every eye is going to see. It says, and they also wished pierce him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, Aman, so they also which pierce him. That account can be found in John the 19th chapter, because, our Lord Yahweh Shai, he was crucified. All right, and after he was crucified, they pretty much, the Romans had pierced him, so those that did that to him, they essentially going to, the Lord's going to put it on their spirit. Hey, that they going to understand that they did that in the ancient world, because if that wasn't the case, what would this be going into? We understand what it's going into, you see, because the scriptures again deal in regeneration. All right, so, just want to go into that, Adonai Tazaz Abanai Apollos, that was a beautiful edification to the spirit. Wow, Adonai Tazaz Adam Yash like Allah Tawab, Lord as well. You have a good night. Wa shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Shalom, shalom.